will focus on things that are implementable and actionable.
They've identified these 10, but all of them lead into how the economy can do better.
We will be using the resources of the Niti Aayog in helping us in moving this whole agenda forward.
The Prime Minister has taken this initiative to make sure that we have a team of economists working with other stakeholders to deliver better, shorter and longer outcomes.
Those were the 5 bright minds from the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Hello and welcome to this special show State of the Economy. 2 weeks after the birth of this PMEAC, the panel of economists have identified 10 areas that need immediate attention for accelerating growth and jobs. Now, those are economic growth, job creation, informal sector and integration, fiscal framework, that's number 4, monetary policy, number 5, 6 is public expenditure, 7 institutions of economic governance, 8 agriculture and animal husbandry, 9 patterns of consumption, and 10 social sector. That's the 10-point areas of focus that the PMEAC will focus on. Today we are joined by one of the members of the council, Mr. Rathin Roy, member of the council as well. He was member of the FRBM and so already a policy-making economist. In a bit, we will also be joined by Mr. R. Gandhi, former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor. As well, A.K. Bhattacharya, Editor Business Standard, will be joining us in a bit. Let me first welcome you, Mr. Roy. Well, first up, is there a feeling that this downturn is extremely important to be tackled, or is it a feeling that this is just disruption because of GST, will settle down and we will get back to 7% in a bit? Is this a slowdown that we should worry about too much?
Well, if our national aspiration is to grow as close to 8% as possible, and if you believe, as I do, that it is possible, then, given the fact that we're not growing at that level, I think we need to take steps to grow to that level. Now, there are 2 ways you can look at this. One is to say there are short-term things that we need to change to go to moving forward, and there are structural factors that we need to address moving forward. So the approach, I think, of the AC has been that if we take for a start these fairly wide-ranging 10 areas of policy activity, and we identify things that can be done in now time to get results in the short term using now time instrumentation such as the forthcoming government budget and other areas of policy, plus begin to address or accelerate progress in addressing structural constraints that would deliver results in a fairly relatively longer term period. Okay. It's a combination of these 2 that would deliver us to 8% growth, which has been our, as yet, I must point out, upturns and downturns apart, unmet aspiration.
Well, no, Dr. Roy, let me probably reiterate my question. There is one school of thought which believes that we are doing fairly well at 7.5% on an average. Up until, say, 5 quarters ago, we were growing at 7.6%. And the intermittent slowdown that we have seen in the third and fourth quarter of last fiscal and the first quarter of this fiscal was engendered by demonetization first and then by GST. Things will settle down once these policies are straightened out, the GST glitches are removed, and we will be back to 7.5%. That's one view. The other view is that we have gone off from 7.5%, and it is something to worry. We need to stimulate either with fiscal or monetary instruments. Which camp do you fall?
I do not fall in either of these camps, because these judgments made on quarterly data are unhelpful in policy making. Let me reiterate what I said. I think our aspiration is, as a nation, to hit 8% growth. And I think there are short-term things we need to do to address them, irrespective of react, and that does not mean being reactive. There are things that you would do anyway, which would possibly, address anything you need to be reactive about, such as a temporary supply shock or a temporary demand shock. And these are short-term things that we need to do, and there are long-term things that we need to do. I have not seen anybody bold enough to present me an econometric estimate that tells me that past policy measures have caused shocks to the economy that we need to worry about in that partial equilibrium sense, in the limited sense. We have an external environment we need to worry about. We have to worry about, for instance, whether the exchange rate needs treatment. We have to worry about our policy instrument, that is the interest rate, and how that is impacting both economic growth and inflation. And we have to worry about what we do in the budget. That is the realm in which we operate. So these schools of thought, if they were academic, I would anyway then respond academically, but they're not even academic. They tend to be anecdotal, and I don't think that it's very productive to move forward anecdotally.
Okay. So the Reserve Bank statement, monetary policy statement, held out some hope for growth. It said that already the core sector, the last number that we've got for core sector, has moved up to 4.9%. It pointed out that auto sales have picked up considerably in the month of September. I mean, it pointed out to some lead indicators and said that the worst is over and things have picked up. Is that an optimism you share?
I do not agree with your reading of the RBI statement that the worst is over and things have picked up. I do agree that they say that growth 2 quarters ahead will be higher than it is now, but please note it will not be anywhere near 8%. Or sustainable. So we still have to worry, irrespective of the RBI statement, while taking into account of the things we need to do using fiscal, monetary, exchange rate policy and sector policies to get growth up on a sustained basis. It is the RBI's job, of course, since it runs, it has to express policy with respect to the interest rate on quarterly terms. It is its job to provide assessments in quarterly terms. But if you look at the assessments they have provided, I've written about this, they tend to be, to say the least, rather volatile. It is not as if there's a consistent narrative emerging from a reading of different RBI quarterly statements, and that is because, placed in Bombay, they are reacting to quarterly developments the best way they can and taking a call on what to do with the interest rate. Okay. So therefore, I would interpret what the RBI is saying as one piece of data that shows a certain quarterly possibility. I think our job is to make sure that the quarterly possibility is underpinned by a sustainable process of growth acceleration, which brings employment and inclusivity. And I think that is where the Council ought to focus. And I'm happy after today's meeting that is where we are focusing.
Okay. Well, would you or the Council therefore advocate that we need some kind of a fiscal stimulus? That's something which some people have been advocating. It's okay if fiscal deficit goes to 3.5 or even a little more. A fiscal stimulus is needed. Would that be the cornerstone of the next budget?
Well, Latha, wouldn't you agree with me that if we were to advocate anything at all, we should do it after looking at the facts and at the very least discussing it at the next 1 or 2 meetings, given that time is short? And if such advocacy were to be done, then the Prime Minister should be the first to hear about it.
Okay. All right. What is it that you can share in terms of, an immediate step or steps that the Council is working on as work in progress? Does it want something to be done to the banking system so that transmission is better? Vivek Debroy spoke about it in the press conference as well. Is there a worry that at the moment the RBI is working on linking the lending rates to external benchmarks like, say, the GSEC rate or the T-bill rate? Is this one thing that you would pursue, better transmission?
Let me answer that question. Very good question. Let me answer it in 3 parts. One at the more general level, which is that, the reason that I love living and working in India as a professional global economist, as an Indian, of course, I do, is that it is one of the most interesting economies in the world. And that means the complexity of questions you ask is widespread. You've picked a few, but there are also complex questions about agriculture.
Yes.
There are questions about whether inclusive growth can be measured by looking at auto sales. There are questions, and then there are questions of minute architecture, such as the one you just mentioned the RBI is looking at. So I think the job of the Council is to look at all these questions and come up with a considered view, binding together the idea that all these questions are answered with a view on what do these do to bring about sustainable, inclusive economic growth. And we have left a panoply of questions out for the moment, which include, for instance, the impact of the digital economy,
yes.
Very important question, climate, sustainability and green finance. We have not actually approached these now because it's a full plate. The second level, I would say, this is not a policy-making body. This is a recommendatory body. So I don't think our approach is going to be that we are one of many stakeholders providing policy inputs to the governmental process. I think it will be that the Council is going to be working in synergy with other stakeholders in government, such as the Reserve Bank of India and the Ministry of Finance, for which very good reason we had the Chief Economic Advisor make the first presentation to the Council this morning. And the idea is to work collaboratively towards answering some of the questions you mentioned, not to offer policy alternatives to those proposed in government for their own sake. Okay.
Well, let me ask you just two more quick short questions and then invite my panel as well to make their observations. Mr. Roy, is there anything that is already ready in your mind or the committee's mind that you will recommend? Anything concrete that I can take as a takeaway?
That would be extremely grad student-like of me, wouldn't it? We've just had our meeting today, and if I were to come out with pat recommendations without having consulted and talked to my colleagues, then that would be very premature, don't you agree?
No. I thought from the committee itself, if all of you agreed on something that you all can work on as a recommendation, is there anything? Okay, fine. If that's not the case, let me come to the other question that occurred to me. You know, there are contrary positions at the moment being taken by the Chief Economic Advisor and the Monetary Policy Committee. The Chief Economic Advisor has argued that there is space to cut rates. The MPC has not quite obliged, except with a 25 basis. That was not at all the Chief Economic Advisor's standpoint. What is your standpoint or the committee's on monetary policy?
I have no current standpoint on the Committee on Monetary Policy. If you wish to ask me that question in my capacity as the Director of NIPFP, I
Yes,
can.
Indeed. Yes, indeed.
I cannot possibly have a standpoint as a member of the committee because the committee has to discuss it.
So,
all right? Yes. I think that there is a very strong case for fiscal and monetary policy to bear equal responsibility in ensuring that we have strong and sustainable growth. I think it is wrong on part of any part of government to advocate any disturbance of the current fiscal path of consolidation on short-term grounds. And I would be, while I have an open mind, I would need to be convinced that those short-term grounds were sufficiently compelling. Going forward, we have an opportunity with the FRB and committee's recommendations, which I was a member of, as you said, to think of a structural medium-term framework for fiscal policy, in which fiscal policy will have a growth-enhancing role and a stabilization role. However, if the independence of monetary policy equals monetary dominance, then I do not think that is a very good idea, speaking for myself as an economist, and therefore I think we have to understand better precisely how the Monetary Policy Committee arrives at its conclusions with respect to what the interest rate ought to be given anticipated inflation, and whether perhaps we need to understand better that there were compelling reasons why we have a bound for monetary policy between 2 and 6%, and therefore the 4% midpoint is not a point target, and therefore some flexibility in securing inflation within the current bound that is consistent with allowing growth to happen could be considered by the Monetary Policy Committee. But this is something that I'm happy I could engage with collectively with the Council as we go forward.
Okay, have I understood you right? You think that at the current juncture there is no scope to, or the government, I mean, not as a panel member, as an economist, your position is that the government should not swerve from the fiscal target it has set itself, but you think as an economist there is monetary space, right?
Let me just, with a minor caveat, I mean, again, I have an open mind. I mean, I dislike being called a fiscal hawk.
Okay.
If I have a credible use the government could put its fiscal expansionary ideas to that would deliver growth results in 2 quarters, I am yet to be convinced. I've not seen an argument, but I'm open-minded. And on the second, you're absolutely right. I do believe there is monetary policy space.
Fair point. Now let me invite my panel, since they have heard you out very clearly. First up, Mr. Gandhi, what's your sense? This is the personal opinion of Mr. Roy, is that there is monetary space. and fiscal only if he's very convinced he would want, any fiscal liberty to be taken. Your thoughts?
See, post the Monetary Policy Committee framework came on the scene. It is the statutory duty of the Reserve Bank through the Monetary Policy Committee to keep the inflation within the range that has been prescribed by the law. So there is no choice for the MPC to be away from working away from these boundaries. So their prime duty becomes inflationary management. To the extent that they have the confidence that inflation is under the targeted regime, then they may be taking into account what can be done for the growth. So growth objective becomes a secondary fiddle for the MPC.
Okay.
So if their projections, I heard the argument that several people also do mention that the current inflationary position and going forward also, if the midpoint is around 4, that should be sufficient. It need not be exactly fixated on 4.
Okay.
But I would think a little differently. Because MPC would look at the risks that are involved for the inflation, even though midpoint achievable could be at the midpoint. The upside risk will definitely be weighing in their mind. And if there's a chance, a greater chance of upside risk being getting crossed to over 6, then they would hesitate.
Take your point. So, so your submission is that the MPC would not take liberties with that 4% and would not use the word flexible too flexibly. That's your point of view. Actually, we have to take a mandatory break. We are coming back in a jiffy, and we have more economists joining us, Dr. Arvind Virmani, as well Mr. Bhattacharya of Business Stand.